Hi everyone, this is Athletes Capital. We have a very interesting guest today for two reasons. First of all, he was an ex-athlete in a sport that, in his words, is not very well paid, but very demanding.
I find money something that is incredibly motivating. And the reason I find that is because I know what it is like to have no money and to live without electricity.
And after he transitioned in his corporate career and worked for companies like Yahoo and had a lot of corporate experience, and now he's in the investment world.
Listen, I was at Yahoo, right? We could have bought Facebook for less than $1 billion, Google at the time for less than $1 billion.
We're gonna talk about a lot of interesting topics about money.
You have a lot of these assets that are undermanaged, under-optimized.
Finance, investing.
I think that the total amount of assets of athletes investing is about 0.5% of all VC capital that is being deployed.
And what athletes should do during their career and post their careers. Stay tuned, guys. Let's jump on it. Welcome to Athletes Capital.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, I want to appreciate that you're putting the time to be with us today. And second, I want to appreciate you as well, because I know you have some very funky and interesting stories to share with the audience. So what would you say? Let's jump on it.
Let's go for it. And listen, thank you again for having me. Everybody thinks they're an expert in many things. But turns out you're only as good as your last transaction. So
Exactly.
I think we can have a good conversation today about some of the wins and some of the failures as well, probably.
Yeah, and just we have to both keep in mind that this is not about us. It's about the people and the audience that is listening, and I'm sure that we will provide some value, some valuable lessons to them.
That's the plan.
Let's start with the basics. Tell our audience a little bit about yourself, about your background. You've been in sports, so it's going to be extremely interesting for you to tell us more about that.
Sure, yeah. So I'm Wim Ponnet. I'm a Belgian national. I live near Geneva, in the mountains. I'm in my 50s now, so probably a little bit older than you are, and maybe a bit older than most of your listeners. Comes with a little bit of capital in experience. Luckily enough, as you rightly say, I started my career as a professional athlete, as a sportsman. So I paddled kayaks in my 20s and in my teens, both for Belgium and Australia, at a varying level, everything from national to international to Olympic to World Championships, sort of that level. And then at a later stage in my career, running rivers and hucking myself off as many waterfalls as humanly possible. So being alive is a win in itself. And then I moved on in my career working for a variety of large corporates. I worked for Coca-Cola, Yahoo, put two companies called Endemol and Shine together in 2015, ended up selling that, which was sort of what launched my career in let's call it the investment world and the capital allocation world, both on the corporate side, as on the fund side, as on the sort of structured capital side of things. So been around the block a few times, probably have seen a few of the cycles in the markets, and have definitely seen, I think, evolve from athletes being probably in certain sports well remunerated, to retiring, to simply living off that money, to athletes starting to think about maybe doing some smarter things with their capital, with less or more success as they go along.
Yeah, you said it very nice. And I want to focus now on something very interesting, and I'm sure it's going to be interesting for our audience, which is, tell us a little bit more about that transition from sports. And you mentioned that you've been in a pretty high level sport. You mentioned Olympics, World Championships. Speak a little bit about that transition. How was it with you, especially mentally, from sports to the corporate world?
Yeah, for me, that was actually really, really complicated. I had not planned my exit from professional sports at all. And in full transparency, there was very little financial planning to be done because kayaking isn't earning you a lot of money. You are investing money in it, and you do it for glory and not even for fame because there isn't much fame to be had. But you do it for the love of the sports, and in many ways, I think it is one of these classical passion projects where you have a dream and you want to be world champion and you want to be European champion and you want to be national champion. You want to do a lot of things, and some of these things you achieve to do and other things you do not achieve to do. And my decision to stop kayaking was linked to a whole host of politics that I no longer agreed with, and so I decided to get out, sort of on a whim, no pun intended, um, and I was completely unprepared for it. So it meant, I think, falling a little bit into sort of a bit of a black hole. You know, you go from people, your coaches, your fans telling you, "Oh, you're the best," and you actually believing that because as an athlete in an individual sport, you need to believe that you are on the best or on a path to be the best. To finding yourself along the general population and not really having any purpose in life. And I think I ran around for a little bit of time not having purpose in my life. And yeah, I don't particularly look back at that period as a very sort of, it's not memories that I'm very fond of or a period that I particularly care to revisit. And so outside of whatever happens, and actually you have people I think now being way more prepared for that and thinking of their career after sports. And I think many smart athletes still get a formal education and still in parallel look at other options for their career, or increasingly get into that creator economy where they become the broadcasters of sort of their own life and create value in that way, which was something that really wasn't available to us, right? 35 years ago, to us. But is available to the generation of athletes now. And I think athletes now are probably better surrounded and better prepared for what happens after their career, regardless of whether they actually achieved all of their dreams or not. But for me, I think it's fair to say that it was a complicated period.
I really, really appreciate what you said, man, because I think 99% of the athletes, especially if they go out from sport unprepared and how to say suddenly without them planning to, I think they all go through that period that you mentioned, like a black hole period. And I think it's a good thing for us to say now that they should not be scared from that kind of periods, because I'm sure you will agree with me that that's actually how you find your balance in the real world. Because before that, I mean, you had people that were cheering for you and everything was focused on you. But then in the real world, you're just another guy that has to find his balance and to know where his place is.
Yeah, listen, we sort of alluded on this, right, yesterday when we had a quick chat about the prep for this con. I've been thinking about it, but in many ways, as an athlete, you are incredibly immature in your way of the world, right? Because you have all these people shielding you from all the noise in the outside world, and you have one goal, right? And if you want to be good at your sport, you need to be able to tune out all the noise and prepare and focus on just one thing. And in some way, right, that is, it's sort of an autistic way of looking at the world, which is performance is all that matters. And you tune out everything from family to friends to relationships to, at least that's how it was for me. And I think you see a new generation now of people that are way more comfortable showcasing themselves with their partners and their kids, and that actually have understood that in order to be a complete athlete, you need to have all of these assets of your life in order, and you need to similar to what you do when you get out of university and you need to prepare for what comes after your career, right? And you need to think about how you plan your career. As an athlete, you should be doing that as well, because you're not always going to be in your 20s or 30s, right? If you're lucky and you get to continue into your 30s, right? Yeah, even that is going to be gone at some stage. And then what happens next, right? What are you going to do? What are you going to focus on? Um, and I think you see athletes, right, that are very open about it. Right? Like somebody I immensely admire is somebody like a Max Verstappen, who is arguably at the height of his capabilities. I think he is racing better than he ever was, and he is clearly no longer happy with where Formula One is at the moment, and he is doing other things, right? Within that, starting his own racing team, focusing on potentially other aspects of it, and I think those are the type of people, purely from a how you prepare yourself mentally for these things, that I look up to and say I think those are the guys that actually have their shit together, because that to me is a great example.
Just as a side note, something funny, and that on the topic what you said, that basically the athletes are unprepared for the real world. I had some ex-colleagues that they didn't know how to pay their water bill and their electricity, so they stopped their electricity. After 3 months they didn't pay them, and suddenly they had to understand where they have to go, and they had to pay their electricity bill and all these things. But that just shows how extreme this is, because you have to be focused on your craft if you want to be a professional athlete. But there's in the real world, rules are different.
They are, and listen, I had never ironed a shirt, or never done any laundry, or never done like the basic things, right? Where when you're in your 20s, you should really be able to take care of these things. And I still see now in my 50s that I have certain handicaps of things that I never did, right? Like, and they're social handicaps in many ways, and simply because you have been so incredibly focused. Now, I do really believe that some of these handicaps in terms of focus and commitment to things, and this slightly autistic way of approaching life, have also served me incredibly well in life afterwards, in terms of focus on getting things done, reducing the noise, focusing on what actually matters, right? Because there are very few things, even in business, that actually do matter. And the other learning, right? Like, you got the shadow side, which is, there are things that socially I am less well prepared for. On the other hand, I think I'm probably better prepared to execute and to. I have zero interest in the things that everybody else does, right? Like, what motivates me is the extraordinary, the things that maybe nobody else wants to achieve, that may seem impossible to achieve to others. That level of aspiration, you don't always find that in the workplace, right? And for somebody with a sort of eclectic background like myself, kayaking, not necessarily focused much on formal education until much later in life, and going through that, I think that focus and ability to execute, and it's like a skier on a slope, like, you don't look at the whole thing, right? Or a kayaker running a rapid on a river, is all you need to do is make that next move. And that focus, I think, is something that, when working with other athletes, I think most of us have. And I don't know how that was for you, or whether you experience the same, but I definitely feel that.
That was one of the questions, but since you mentioned it, we'll talk about it now a little bit, because I also thought that, because being in sport, your environment basically requires from you to be focused, disciplined, all the things that you mentioned, and you think that everybody is like that, and when you go into the so-called real world, you see that almost nobody is like that. And I want to push a little bit on that subject, because that's a huge asset for the athletes, that they can implement not only on the pitch or on the court or in the kayak, but they can implement in the so-called real life. and in business and investing, and that is one of the qualities that can make them successful.
I'm with you, um, and I think that is absolutely true, and probably increasingly so. I do think, and I'm going to sound really old now, that some of that actually is lost with the current generation. I don't think that same ambition about achieving, and I think you nailed it, right? I think we probably realize that almost nobody is like that. So you have these expectations that are probably unrealistic from other people, that they are going to be as driven and as one track minded in terms of achieving targets as you are going to be. That is really not the case.
Yeah, definitely agree on that. And let's switch gears a little bit. Since our name is Athletes Capital, most of the topics that we're going to talk are going to be around capital and capital allocation. Something interesting, when I was quitting my career, because I quit my career earlier, I had 2 years more contract. And when I was telling that to my peers there in the team, I saw that most of them, if somebody offered them the same amount of money that they were receiving, or maybe close to that, but offered them to do something else, they would probably agree. But they had
Mm.
one fear, and that fear was mainly connected with money, because you are used to receiving money on a monthly basis. It doesn't matter how much you spend, the money will always come the next month, maybe more. So that you're getting used to that, and you don't know again what is going to be afterwards when you don't have a contract anymore, or you're not a professional athlete. So I saw that they were afraid, mostly because they didn't know, they were concerned financially how the things would look like. So how was it in your case? Although you said that kayak is not the best paying sport in the world, but do you have some observation around this subject?
Yeah, listen, 100%, right? Like I think it's probably more accentuated even than it is for other people, right? Like it's I find money something that is incredibly motivating, and the reason I find that is because I know what it is like to have no money and to live without electricity, involuntary, right? Because there simply is no electricity, or you can't afford electricity, right? That's what it was like in the beginning of my career, living out of a van on the side of the road where you train, right, in the cold, in the and not making any money, right? Like not knowing whether you can actually pay your bills at the end of the month, and money was not the motivation for me, right? Like I was quite happy to do what I did and live the way I did in order to do this. And I think in many ways the transition you're describing is what happened to me a little bit later in my career, right? Like I was quite successful, whatever that means, right, in the corporate world, and getting nice and increasingly nice paychecks month over month, and decided to make that jump to set up on my own and go and do my own thing without having that. And so that drive, I think, that we had before, I think it serves there, but you need to get used with this ambiguity of not having a constant paycheck coming in that is actually going to do it. So you need to become a little bit smarter, I think, about how you and I think in many ways, and I don't know where you were when you ended your career in terms of family and things like that, but you have family that gets used to a certain standard of living and things like that as well, and they get used to that paycheck coming in, and much harder sometimes to stop them from spending the way they are used to spending when you move into that new world as well. And so that also creates an additional stress. And in genuine, I think that athletes are ill prepared for that, and are very often poorly surrounded and advised to prepare for what comes next. And I think this is where things are going to come to, well, how do you invest in that then as well, right? So it's the, are you going to make investments where you hope there's going to be a nice exit, or do you need to look at things that are actually going to be dividend rich? All of those things, I think, are parts where athletes are ill advised or poorly surrounded to actually tackle.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, For sure. Let me challenge you now with the next question. Imagine yourself that you are a young athlete in whatever sport, and you're just signing your first professional contract. It has enough zeros in the contract, and you having the experience you have now, what would you do to prepare yourself for that step that you're actually talking?
So probably invest a little bit of money, right? Like don't go and spend it on stupid shit, like once you have your first car, you don't need another 3 Lamborghinis and 7 watches and 5 girlfriends that are going to come and bite you in the ass. And right, like focus on the things that matter. You're not going to be 20, 30 or even 40 forever, right? And once you are going to be in your 50s, right, you're going to have less options than you have now. So injury is another thing to think about. So probably invest a little bit of your money, right? And I think real assets like real estate or things that are going to generate you a yield and are fairly secure to depreciation and are in they're not going to be the sexy things, right? Like they're not going to be the things that you can flaunt and you can walk around with, but I think they're going to help protect you a little bit. And then I would say find somebody who you can trust, genuinely trust, right? To surround you with, to help you invest the rest of your money. And I think people often think that investing is the same as gambling, but it shouldn't be, right? Like you should surround yourself with somebody or an institution that is going to help you generate the yield and protect your assets and your wealth in a way that is meaningful. And in my view, that needs to be a little bit more institutionalized than it being your cousin Danny who has made a few investments because he sold his company. I think it's a job for professionals.
When you're saying institutionalize, let's explain a little bit in details what actually do you mean institutionalize, and speak a little bit about what does mean investing in an asset that they give you yield.
Anything you can rent is yield, right? I think there are, and this is a world that I'm aware of, but I'm not intimately familiar with. I think there are yield strategies on things like stable coins, etc., that can generate yield and probably generate yield well above more classical structured capital type of things. On the other hand, I think listen, there's some pretty damning statistics, right? Like 1 in 6 NFL draftees, right? So these are the guys who actually made it, end up in bankruptcy court at some stage in their career. And nearly 8 out of 10 NFL players are in some sort of financial trouble within 2 years of leaving the game. That's 80%, right? Like 78% to be exactly, that end up in trouble. And even some of the biggest names have gotten burned on investments they've made, right? Like look at FTX, right? Over $2 billion of investor capital, valued at 32 billion, zero recovery in the end, right? Tom Brady, right, one of the highest paid athletes in the world, got paid 55 million in equity that is now worth absolutely nothing, right? That's not compensation, that's just pure extortion and extraction. Steph Curry, 35 million in the same deal. The only one, right, who was a little bit smarter in that deal, probably because he's a more seasoned investment and has a little bit through it, is Shaquille O'Neal, right? He invested 600K, he sued and got 1.8 million back. He actually made money on the money he put in by suing. And there is still, I believe, an 11 billion lawsuit running now with many athletes involved in that. So is that an investment you should have made? Now, clearly, hindsight is always 2020, right? Like, so you can't be sure about that. But athletes very often confuse access to deals as an advantage, but they're very often the last money in on something. So like the venture capital market, right? Like a quarter of all venture outs last year were flat or down. And celebrity investors, right? And I'll take anything from actors to athletes, right? Are disproportionately entering at the top end of that. This year, 1 in 5 rounds is down. If you enter at that last valuation, you are, before you get in, already underwater. So they're giving you equity, but they're also taking your name, your audience, and your credibility with no downside protection. And that's where I think lots of athletes investing sort of fails.
You speaking about that, I think we have to land on a pretty important subject in terms of investing, and that's education. Because first of all, the athletes, I think they should be educated that an investment in the investment world is a long-term game. It's not that, because sometimes they make the mistake of thinking that if I put 100,000 today, I want 3 years down the road this to be tenfold, and that's earning money more than investing, because investing is really for the long run. And first, they should make the difference between the two. But also, what would you say in terms of educating themselves? I mean, there's so much content right now and books.
Yeah, listen, I don't disagree with that, but the fact that there is so much content is probably a real issue as well, right? Because you have the next snake oil salesman selling you how to get rich in 10 minutes a day, or investing in stock and whatever. I would be of the opinion that I don't think people should get into something they know nothing about, right? And I think it goes to overall education, right? If you are in parallel to your career progressing on a path to becoming an engineer or a programmer or I don't know, a beautician or a nutritionalist or whatever, right? I think, and that's my personal view, it makes sense to structure your investments around something that you know, and where you are going to be more than a passenger on board, right? Like if you outside of, and I will still go back to this, right? I still think real assets like real estate and potential other yield strategies, right, accompanied by the right person. I I think there is something in the stablecoin world and all of that, and there's guys like Sandwell Capital out of New York that are doing some really sort of structured capital investments within this space that I think make sense. But I don't understand enough about it, so I would rather have somebody manage that for me that actually understands it and is going to manage that yield generation for me, with a certain level of capital protection that you're not going to get if you're going to try to do this on your own. So leaving that aside, outside of that, I would argument that it is as important to understand the fundamentals of the business, and hopefully it's a business and not an aspiration you're investing in, because otherwise you're just gambling or funding something. It's as important to understand the business fundamentals and to understand the levers you have as an athlete, if you're doing this while your career is still running, or as a operator if your career is over and you want to take part in it, because otherwise you're a passenger on the cruise ship that is very hard to turn, and you're not in charge of the outcome.
So it's extremely important, is what you're saying, to know where you put your money in, and to educate yourself about the asset class and the people who are going to manage the money. In terms of that, basically the athletes, they know best one asset class, and these are the sports assets, right? Normally that's how it should be. What would you say investing in that type of asset class? There's something like a hype now in the US, and it's coming into Europe as well.
Yeah, so listen, I would definitely agree that that is something that is interesting. So sports tech alone is a $20 billion market, right? Growing 22% year over year. By 2030, it's over 60 billion. Sports media rights, content distribution, that's a 150 billion ecosystem. Media rights alone hit $63 billion last year. That's the fuel of it all. US sports rights are 30 billion today. They're heading to 37 billion. This is where the money's moving. The creator economy I mentioned earlier, right, where athletes are increasingly living, that's approaching $500 billion in dollars. Sports content on YouTube, right? That grew 45% last year alone, 35 billion hours. That's not niche any longer, that's infrastructure. So if you put all of that together, the sports adjacent economy is about $200 billion plus annually. The opportunity, in my view, for athletes isn't necessarily investing in teams and taking 1% of the Raiders or Arsenal or whatever. The opportunity is in investing in the infrastructure around it, right? Like, so that I see as something where athletes have the ability to understand it fully, because ultimately it's what's getting them paid today, and to actually influence and shape that a little bit more. So I see a real opportunity there.
So when you're saying, you mean investing in the content creators, in the media companies that are actually distributing sport?
Yeah, anything within that sports tech, sports media, where they can actually have it can be anything from apparel to, and a lot of the stuff you see happening there, right, is actually generating brands that are going to live potentially for generations. And look at what Federer did with On Running in Switzerland. Like, it's the brand that is attacking the Nikes and the Adidases of this world. That is, it's incredibly native and incredibly natural to be doing that. The fan base will understand it. It's a business that you understand because you've been spending the last 5, 10, 20, whatever years of your career within that ecosystem. You have the contacts, you have the credibility. So your chances of adding operational value there, I think, are way higher than, I don't know, launching a tequila business tomorrow.
Well said, well said. Okay, you kind of went in that direction about I want to talk a little bit about the mistakes in the investment world, because a lot of people perceive that if you're a professional investor, or even if you're a normal investor, you don't make mistakes. I mean, you do everything right, you know everything, you have all the answers. But me and you, we both know that that's just not the case. And I always like to give an example about Warren Buffett and his portfolio. I think it was in 2022 or 2023, one of his annual letters, where he said that he made around 300 plus investment decisions in his career at that time, and just 4% of his portfolio was responsible for almost all the growth in Berkshire's return. So that just shows you that most of his investments were not that good, but he made the right ones, these 4%, which are like 12, 13 companies, but they make almost all the difference. So what I'm trying to say is that there is a room for mistakes in the investment world, but I would like to know your opinion on that. And maybe give us some example where you made a mistake.
Listen, there are definite mistakes or whatever that you've been. Listen, I was at Yahoo, right? We could have bought Facebook for less than $1 billion, Google at the time for less than $1 billion, and we could do that way better ourselves, right? Like, we don't need Google, we don't need, like, how wrong you sometimes are, right? And how convinced you are that you are right in your own ability to go and do things, right? That's one of the drivers, I think, in terms of, it's also the things that you don't invest in, right? Like, I am not in crypto whatsoever. I don't understand it. I think it's a scam. I know I'm wrong. But something in me is telling me not to get into it and not to do that, right? Like I struggle with it. And so I haven't gone into it, and I've never made any returns. And since we're talking about the things you're chasing, right? Like, I think there are things to be done with, as an example, the parent company of the Tour de France, Group Amaury. I would love to have been able to buy that. Capital lines up, you're able to do it. In order to do a deal, you need both a seller and a buyer. And if you don't have a seller, you're not going to get there. I've had other deals like that in my career as well, and I think there will be others. I think who you associate yourself with, right? Like in certain things, and sometimes it has nothing to do with you, but it is the market, right? Look how wrong WeWork went. On paper, an amazing thing to be investing in, right? Like co-working space. And I would go a step further, right? If you invested in commercial real estate offices 10 years ago, you were probably making a very sensible investment because there were more and more people in offices, and post COVID, all of that shit is gone, right? Like, look at Dubai. Let's say you've invested in Dubai. Look what's happening in the world now, right? Is that going to come back to the levels where it was? Not everything is always in your hands. So I think, in particular for athletes, right, who are making good money now and need to secure that and need to invest it, I think it's hedging the portfolio. People are always going to need a home to live in, so maybe that's not going to yield you the 20-30% you're going to get on other things, but you'll get a steady 8-9% return per year if you're doing it smart, right? And at least you're protecting your asset, which is also appreciating. So maybe part of the portfolio should go into that. Maybe part of it is the public markets. Maybe part of it needs to go in the. If you are wealthy, right, and you organize yourself reasonably in sort of a family office, and you go and do things, I would suggest you let professional people handle that for you, because they're not going to have the emotion around it, and they're not going to have. Is I think, listen, I come from a shitty sport, right? Like, nobody knows me, nobody knows kayaking, nobody. You come from football, soccer for our American friends, right? Very different, very much more high profile. People know you. People know you will have made a little bit of money, and you're gonna have your friend Jack and Jim all, hey, I got this thing to invest in, right? Like, it's easier also, I think, as a protection for an athlete to have somebody professionally who can be the buffer and who can be the bad guy to tell Jim and Jack and your auntie and your brother no, right, to the things that they think you should invest in, but it's not their money.
In connection with that, I think one of the easiest people to take their money out of their pocket are the football players, and I just saw that from experience for exactly what you said. But digging a little bit deeper, would you say that it's better to diversify your investment portfolio or to be more focused? Because there are different opinions about that, and my personal opinion is that it depends how good you think you are or how comfortable you are with the investment.
Oh man, I struggle to give investment advice because I'm just trying to figure it out as well, right? Like, I am focused in what I do, and I only focus on things where I have an operational impact and can actually make a difference. And I think that is what works for me because there are only so many things that I can do. But ultimately, I am not investing my own millions, right? I am working with the money for the people that I am investing and that I am trying to create value for, obviously making a little bit of value for myself along the way. I would rejoin you, and there is this saying, right? Like, can all your eggs be in one basket, and is that what it should be? I would argue probably not. And I think investing is a you should probably allocate part of your capital to sort of higher risk things and say, I don't know, I'm worth 100 million, like, there's 10 million that can be highly speculative, and then I'm going to make sure that I put 50 aside, right? That is fairly longer term, and I'm in my 20s. I'm 25, let's say, right? I'm worth 100 million, like, putting money away, putting 50 away for 20 million. Hopefully by then, stupid will be out of me for a little bit, right? And I'll be done, with I'll have my midlife crisis a little bit earlier, I live my best life. But those things are gonna be appreciating assets, and they're gonna, like, I don't think that statistically or mathematically that is a bad way of looking at it. And then deploy a little bit of capital for yield let's maybe say 20% you deploy sort of on yield strategies where, heaven forbid, like you get a bad tackle and you lose use of your foot or whatever, right? And you're 25 and at 26 you're no longer playing. At least you are still going to be getting, you won't be making the same, but you're still getting a steady income in terms of the things that you're doing to fund a lifestyle that is acceptable and fairly similar to what you and your family sort of require to comfortably live.
And also, you mentioned, if I got that correctly, you mentioned that when you were in Yahoo, you had the opportunity to buy Facebook. Was that the case?
Yeah, Facebook, Google, right? Not me personally, right? I wasn't
Yeah,
holding the
the
personal that,
company.
but we did, and so we were part of the team that were looking at that, and yeah, so that did not happen, right? Like it is the eternal assumption of corporates that they are going to be better at executing than that challenger that is going to come, especially in the tech world, and it very rarely happens.
And that's also a proof that sometimes the mistakes they do not come from something that you put money in, but something that you missed. And yeah. So what about the mental side of the mistakes? I mean, how did you deal with that when you made the mistakes you did, for example?
Um, it's stressful, right? In particularly when you are investing part of your own capital in things, and I've had failures fairly recent, right? Like 3 years ago, we were trying to buy the professional rugby league in Australia as one example, and spend a lot of time, money on it. Ultimately, could not get that deal fully funded. I think when you lose your own money investing and some outside money, and there is no joy in that, right? Like there is no pride in it. There is no, and in the end, right, a lot of the time it's the lawyers on your side and the other side when you're negotiating a deal that are making the money. I am very well aware, and unfortunately I've had to deal with a lot of people in this industry that are far from honest and dishonest, right? And make claims and representations about being funded, not being funded. I know personally of other people in this industry that have had the same situation where you have people underwriting something, but their proof of funds is not really a proof of fund, and you try to get a deal done, you take engagement reputationally and all of that. It is not an easy game, man. It's not easy, and it's not there for everybody. And I do think, particularly for athletes, they have a reputation to protect, which is again why I would say work with professional, trustworthy people that you can actually count on to also have your best interest in mind. Not always the case, right? Fundraising is fundamentally hard out there at the moment, and even the largest funds and private equity to VC, if you're a first time manager and you think you're going to be able to raise just off a name or a reputation, I think those times are over. Unless you're Josh Harris at Apollo, who's just raised the biggest fund ever, but a little bit different, right? Because you are seeding that with probably a couple 100 million of your own capital. Very nice if you have them.
You you went into a subject that is extremely important for me and I think for our audience as well. Would you say that more and more capital is coming into the sports industry in Europe?
So yes, and I think definitely in the US, right? You're seeing this. Private equity is trying to take holds of even things within the NCAA. I think people like Michelle Kang in women's sports, Fira Capital doing the same, and I know Nikki and Jess there. I think they're doing a fantastic job looking at women's sports, which I think is a real opportunity, and potentially talking about athlete investment. I think that is an area where they can really make a difference and really increase valuations and get work on multiple expansions simply by the fact that they are present and they are involved. I think that is an interesting one. Um, And now I've completely forgotten your question. So more capital coming in. I do definitely think that there is more capital coming in, right? Like it is when you look at the heart root of it, and Rupert Murdoch had this saying always, right? He said the problem with newspapers is that they are run by people who love newspapers, and it is the same in sports. You have a lot of these assets that are undermanaged, under optimized, simply because they are run by people who love football or they love rugby or they love, and they are passion investments. And I think actually, if you were to do that with a more institutional mindset to it, you would get a better outcome. Now, I have a view on American capital coming into European sports and that not always being successful, simply because the dynamic here is very different, right? Like if you look at US sports and you were to compare that with the Premier League, or you're dealing with 150 years of history and tribalism, it is not a corporate venture, right? Like it is a very, very different beast than investing in the Jets or some NWSL or NWA or NBA team in the US, which you can move from a city and people are still going to be a fan. That's not the case here, right? Like it is tribalism and it works on a very, very different dynamic.
And you know what? I really appreciate what you're saying, because if someone came to me 10 years ago while I was still active athlete and he presented me an opportunity to invest or own a piece of small piece of a sports franchise, I will definitely jump on it. But there weren't any opportunities like that, and now I see more and more people are getting into that asset class, mostly in the US, but I see also in Europe, and Nikki is a good example of that. She will be my guest in the future. But I see that more and more opportunities are coming in that way, and I think also I will agree with you that athletes now have one more asset class that they know best, in my opinion, that they can put some capital to work there as well.
Yeah, and I would still go back to that whole ecosystem around it, right? Like if it is shoes or it is wearables or it is any tech that can actually help, even the whole medical around it, the media ecosystem around it. Like how many successful athletes end up doing something within the media space, right? Whether it is being a commentator or being a pundit on one of the shows, or why would you just take a check for that? Why would you not be a little bit more entrepreneurial in that and join something? Traditional broadcast is not something that is exactly on the rise. Like, what can you do within that space where your brand is going to not just accelerate the top line, but also the bottom line and the multiple that you're going to get for a business like that? And you see people like Gary Neville, right? He's a fair bit after his career now, right? But he is making those investments and he's doing those things, and I think that's the smarter capital. And Kevin Durant, 35V, like Serena Williams, I think those are the guys that have done it. Well, guys and girls. When I say guys, I obviously, because we always assume when we speak about athletes, it's men, but it's the women as well, right? Like you have some fairly successful, like Williams is an example. I think you see it in golf. I think there are other women's sports, right? Like Ilona Maher in rugby in the US, right? She was a revelations after that win the win in the place for third in the LA Olympics at the Paris Olympics. I think those are the people, right? Like if they are well accompanied by smart people, I think have the ability to do something that is more meaningful for their life after their career.
Just last question on this topic. What about the returns from that asset class? I mean, you talk to a lot of investors that are allocating capital there. What returns they are expecting?
Again, an interesting one, right? If you ask Federer whether he made a good investment in these on running shoes, I would argue he says yes, right? If you ask Durant or Serena Williams, right? But that is institutional, right? Like Durant is 550 million assets under management. I mean, that's sizable, right? Like that is institutional capital that you're not just playing along with the small boys. But if you look at I think that the total amount of assets of athletes investing is about 0.5% of all VC capital that is being deployed. So you are honestly along for the ride. You are not doing it institutionally. So I think the only way to make a real return is to do it at an institutional level. And I think the Arctoses and the RSs of this world, right? Like by taking 1 or 3% of something, they're just riding a wave, and I'm sure they're generating interesting returns, but it's not the returns that Jeff Morat with MSP is going to make on his investment in a McLaren team, right? Where he's probably gonna recoup 8 times multiple on his invested capital in the end. So I think unless you control, you are along for the ride.
You're saying it's better to buy control stakes in businesses, or because what I'm seeing is in sports, a lot of the funds are taking minority positions, meaning they're not buying 50+%, they're buying below that. So very small pieces of the franchises.
I find it strange as well, and Nikolay, and even if you look at it, right, like if you buy into, and I think someone like a Mark Cuban, he's made a statement, right? Like he sold, and he's like, I am probably not going to invest in another NFL or NBA or NHL team because the valuations are super high. Listen, a Chelsea or an Arsenal if you pay a couple of billion for a loss-making asset, because everybody looks at the Premier League and go, "Oh, it's amazing!" Like I think there are two teams, right, out of the Premier League that made a profit in 2025, and everything else is losing money, but it's just vanity in terms of what you invest in. I would invest in a women's team now, right, because the valuations are reasonable. You're in early. There's a real interest in terms of the value that women's sports represent. It's on the rise. We're probably again behind on the US, right? Where that NWSL is probably a little bit further ahead of the WSL here, and the same League Feminine in France and in other big territories. But I think there are deals to be done in that space now that are going to make sense, where you are actually going to work on getting these assets profitable simply because the dynamic is very different. You're not going to be dependent on traditional media rights as much as you are in the men's game. So I don't see the interest now in buying an Arsenal, or because I think you're how are you going to get the same multiple of that, right? If it's worth 5 billion today, is it going to be worth 10 in 5 years time? Based on what? Based on what, right? It's not as if there is such an increase in sports rights. In for Listen, the Premier League's domestic rights have plateaued, right? There's a little bit of international expansion, and look at the MSL in the US, right? Like Apple is probably going to get out of that deal earlier than they would have planned, because they're not getting the viewership of it that they were thinking, and it's going to cost you 500 million of an entry ticket to start a new team there now. Is that worth it, right? You play football. Is there any team playing in the MSL that plays against the B team in Bulgaria that even touches a ball? Probably not.
Yeah, probably. But the valuations are so high, right?
At some stage, something's gonna happen, right? That it makes no sense.
Yeah, from a fundamental point of view, I also agree that, I mean, loss-making assets to grow in value so rapidly, I mean, something is gonna pop up. But we both don't know when, right?
Listen, we don't know when, and I want to state this very clearly again. I've been wrong before. I'm probably gonna be wrong again about some things.
Okay, that's a good point, Wim. So before we wrap this up, I want to challenge you with one last question that I think is good for to finish the episode. Again, I will bring you back. You starting as a professional athlete, young one, just sign your first contract, having the experience that you have now. What books would you recommend to yourself, or a movie that will educate yourself, that will move the needle in terms of understanding better the business and the investment world?
Probably an odd one, but I'm gonna say um, Principles by Ray Dalio.
I don't think it's an odd one at all, but tell us why.
I think, like anything, and I've used this analogy before, right? It's like in a kayak. You're sitting in a kayak, or you're on skis, right? Which is probably more relatable for most people. You pick your line, and then you need to stick with it. Like there is no more thinking then until that play has played out and you've executed on it, because there are so many factors outside that you do not control, that you can't influence, and this is true in kayaking as well, right? The water moves in weird ways, and you need to pick your line and then you need to stick with it. And I think what Dalio very clearly explains is in his book, and it is a very, very big book. And I think those principles, they apply for life as much as they apply for investing or business or anything. Is pick the parameters that you're going to play by and then stick to them. Look at the outcome, and if you need to change the parameters, then change them then. But until that's played out, you stick with that. I think that is it's very sound advice overall, and everything becomes measurable in terms of, am I hitting the milestones? Am I doing this? And yeah, it's no different than flying an airplane, or like if you plan it correctly, you're gonna get the outcome you're gonna get to. But at least you will have executed on what you thought was the best way of executing and getting to the result that you wanted to get to.
That's a fantastic advice, man. Thank you for that. First, I want to thank you for the participation. I think we touched on a lot of interesting topics and very broad, but I think we gave a lot of answers to a lot of questions probably that active athletes or ex athletes have in their mind. So I want to thank you one more time.
Man, thank you so much for having me, and I really hope your podcast, as well as the advice you are giving to athletes, is going to go well. I think it's needed. I think it is definitely something that's going to add a lot of value to a lot of people, and hopefully this conversation was a little bit helpful and useful, at least to some people. And it's been a joy being here. I can't thank you enough for the opportunity.